So I woke up this morning to a disturbing news report. It was a report that ended up dominating the headlines in Brazil. And it is something that I can't say shocked me. It's something that I suspected was happening. But as is true before in my career, when I suspected the US government and the UK government were spying on my communications and my husband's communications, it was still different when it got confirmed when he sued the UK government and they admitted they knew he was coming to London and what he was carrying because they had spied on our communications. It's still different to get it confirmed. I knew the US government was trying to find ways to prosecute myself and Laura Poitras for the reporting we did. It still was different when Mike Isikoff in 2019, when he reported that the Obama administration had plotted ways with the CIA to assassinate Julian Assange. Part of that report was that the CIA also tried to create theories to justify my prosecution and Laura Poitras' prosecution. It's still different when it gets confirmed. And all kinds of things were done to me and David during our reporting in Brazil that ended up being very significant in proving that the anti-corruption probe was actually dominated by corrupt judges and prosecutors. There were reports about them investigating our finances. They prosecuted me and brought indictments against me that were ultimately dismissed on First Amendment grounds by the Supreme Court. But still, it's a different thing when it gets confirmed that there's an abuse of power aimed at you, even though if you're a journalist who's worth anything, that's going to happen. Power centers are going to be threatened by you and disturbed by you because your job is to make them uncomfortable, to reveal their secrets, and they're going to end up doing reprisals. Still, it's different when it got confirmed, and it got confirmed today by O Globo, which is one of the largest newspapers in Brazil. It's part of the global media outlet. There you see the headline on the screen. Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda were spied on by Abin during Bolsonaro administration. Now, Abin is the domestic intelligence agency of Brazil. And it has functions, but part of its function is not to spy on journalists who are engaged in investigative reporting. My husband at the time was a member of Congress, part of the parties that formed the opposition to the Bolsonaro government. And they didn't just spy on me, they spied on him too. He was part of the reporting we were doing, but he had his own independent role as a member of Congress. And just to be clear, this is not a story that came from Globo, it came from the federal police. The media in Brazil has long known that, or they just discovered, that Abin was using Israeli spying technology, ironically, so it kind of ties all the stories together. The first thing Bolsonaro did when he got elected in 2018, the very next day he went to Israel. In part for religious reasons, he's evangelical Christian, he was baptized in the Jordan River, but also for, he said, to meet with Israeli security officials to understand how better to protect Brazil's cybersecurity. And as we know, Israel has the most potent and invasive spying software in the world, Pegasus and things like that. That was what was used to expose Jeff Bezos's extramarital affair that broke up his marriage, that was typically credited to the Saudi prince who used Pegasus to break into hack into Jeff Bezos's WhatsApp. They have very powerful technology, spying technologies. And it was recently discovered that Abin was using them, that agents of Abin, against political enemies of the government in ways that were illegal. And it's the federal police in Brazil that are not exactly my friends that confirmed to Globo and then to other news outlets that on this list of people who were illegally spied against were both myself and my husband. Here's part of what Globo reported. Quote, the full list of persons illegally spied on with a cell phone surveillance software during the Bolsonaro administration is still unknown, but the federal police has already located an additional 2 political adversaries of the former president that were targeted by the spooks, journalist Glenn Greenwald and his late husband David Miranda, the former congressman for the PDT party that passed away last May. And as this story played out today and was, as I said, dominating the headlines, Globo just reported a couple hours before we went on the air that the agency inside the federal government that has public prosecutors that's responsible for investigating and prosecuting crimes, they're called the Ministério Público. Sorry to got caught up in that translation. Ministério Público, which is the public ministry They were ironically the agency that tried to prosecute me for my journalism. They are now demanding an investigation into the spying that was done. And here's what the Globo reported. Quote, the section of the public ministry that has jurisdiction over the Federal Court of Accounts demanded this Monday that any possible irregularities committed by Abin in the surveillance and spying of citizens without official justification during the Bolsonaro administration with the goal of persecuting adversary politicians, ministers, and journalists be investigated. The way I see it, quote, the way I see it, there is a clear abuse and distortion of the functions of this organ when it is employed to surveil public adversaries of the president, which I believe is a quote from a member of the Ministerio Público announcing this investigation. So let me just make a couple of observations about this. Number one, when we did the Snowden reporting, part of the reporting was that there was this kind of arms race underway between surveillance agents, agents of the security state, and privacy advocates, that every time privacy advocates would create new weapons against state surveillance to use encryption or to use privacy protecting software, the NSA or the GCHQ or surveillance agencies would immediately get to work on how to invade them, how to render them inoperable. And we did reporting on how some of the encryption that privacy advocates long believed was impenetrable was in fact penetrated by the NSA. And there's this constant war. Privacy advocates make an advance in using encryption, and then the NSA learns how to invade that and spy better. What has happened in the last several years is there's been a huge leap in the powers of spying agencies in the West. And primarily these come from Israeli companies. They are very advanced and sophisticated companies, and they have created spying software that can invade almost every well-known program, Gmail and WhatsApp and pretty much everything. And they're private companies, so they sell it to other governments, to other private corporations. And there's been reporting that Brazil is one of the countries that obtained, not necessarily Pegasus, that's unclear, but some of these extremely invasive spying programs the United States obviously has among the best. And for me, this isn't about any one party or one government. It's not about the Bolsonaro government. It's not about the Obama administration that did it. It demonstrates the reality that if governments and political officials can use spying power against their own populations in the dark, they will inevitably abuse it against their enemies, against their political enemies, against the journalists who investigate them. This is why safeguards are so necessary, not because one party or the other or one side or the other is inherently more corrupt or more abusive of power. It's because human nature will lead people to abuse these powers because it's a very intoxicating power, just like censorship is. Imagine the ability to take the internet and cleanse it of all views that you dislike to ensure that only your views are heard. That's inebriating. It's addictive. And that's why these neoliberal billionaires like Pierre Omidyar and Bill Gates are funding it, because that's a rush. To use your billions to have all the views that you dislike, declare disinformation, and then ban, that's the same with spying. They're very similar. The spying regime we exposed during the Snowden reporting and the censorship regime on which we now focus. And at the heart of it lies human nature that is likely to abuse power if it can exercise it in the dark and with no safeguards, and that is what happened here. Now, the other aspect to this is that this is something that if you're a real journalist, is going to happen to you. In fact, I would go so far as to say that one of the main ways you can recognize a real journalist from a fake one is real journalists are going to be targeted at some point with reprisals by powerful factions, precisely because the role of journalists is to confront powerful factions and make them uncomfortable, be threatening to them, have the ability to expose their secrets that they want hidden, to be able to reveal their acts that are criminal or deceitful to the public. And if governments or other power centers aren't targeting you for reprisals, it's a pretty strong indication that you're not really a journalist in any meaningful sense of the word. I can't tell you how often these employees at liberal digital outlets like shitty tabloids like the Daily Beast and Huffington Post and Vice, all of them, write articles that refuse to call me a journalist, call me an activist or some far-right influencer. And while they call themselves journalists, Ben Collins of NBC News, Taylor Lorenz of the Washington Post have all said, I'm not a journalist, I'm not really a journalist, but they are. What have they ever done that threatens anyone in power? When has Taylor Lorenz or Ben Collins or any of these shitty activists, liberal activists, pro-DNC activists at the Huffington Post and the Daily Beast and Vice and Vox and all these digital outlets that love to claim that only they are legitimate journalists, when have they ever been targeted by anyone with anything? Never. Because they serve people in power. They don't threaten people in power. Go look at what happens to Seymour Hersh, what has happened to him and his career. Go look at the reprisals aimed at Julian Assange, who, in my opinion, is the most influential and consequential journalist of our generation. He's in prison. So when things happen throughout my career, like the US and UK government spying on me, or the British government detaining my husband as part of the Snowden reporting and threatening him with terrorism prosecutions or trying to find ways to prosecute me, or the Brazilian government spying on me and trying to prosecute me. These are things I wear as a badge of honor. Because to me, this is what's going to happen to you if you're a good journalist. Instead, what we get are these posers and LARPers and pathetic narcissists at CNN like Jim Acosta, who wrote this book that sickens me to this day when I look at the title. The Enemy of the People, A Dangerous Time to Tell the Truth in America by Jim Acosta, CNN White House correspondent. There he is in his blow-dried glory and his little manicured fingertips pointing at Donald Trump as though he in some way was endangered. Whatever happened to Jim Acosta? Nothing happened to Jim Acosta, and yet CNN and liberals turn him into this like journalistic martyr when all he does is deliver the messaging of the US security state and the Democratic Party. He's a threat to nobody. He's a little servant of those in power. He's like a pet, a puppy dog. And so people can fight about the role of journalist or the title of journalist and who deserves it all they want. And they can try and deny me that title, even though I have on my shelf every award that has ever been given to journalists by journalist organizations for doing journalism. I don't even consider that important because these awards are ultimately very corrupted. Like I said, the New York Times and Washington Post showered themselves with Pulitzers for their completely fabricated and deceitful reporting about Russiagate. Those aren't what matter to me. What matters to me are the results, what you provoke from powerful actors. And the journalists that I respect, the people who I think have actually done meaningful journalistic work, are the people who are the target of these kinds of reprisals. It doesn't make it justified. I think the people who abuse these spying powers should be investigated, but at the end of the day, it's not a surprise to me. I operate on the premise that this is happening precisely because I try and make my work adversarial to those in power. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters in your journalism, is whether you are vindicating the rights of the public to know what powerful people are doing. And if you actually do that, instead of serving as a propaganda arm for those powerful entities, this is the outcome. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.